While the entire country was watching Spokane, where a wildfire tore through a major American city and forced 65,000 people out of their homes, a completely different fire was quietly becoming something far larger just 2 hours to the north. It did not start with a headline. It started with a single lightning strike in open grassland, roughly a mile south of a small town most people outside Washington state have never heard of. 3 weeks later, that lightning strike has grown into one of the largest wildfires burning anywhere in the United States right now, well over 17 times the size of the fire that made national news in Spokane, and it is still not fully contained. This is the story of the Kaiser Canyon Fire. And today, we are walking through exactly how it grew this large, what fire officials are watching right now to determine what happens next, and why a fire burning almost entirely in open grassland can still be one of the most demanding wildfires in the country to actually put out. If tracking major wildfires as they develop is something you want to keep doing, subscribing means you catch every update the moment new containment numbers or new evacuation orders come in, because this fire is still actively burning as this video is being made. Let's go back to where it started. At around 6 in the morning on July 16, 2026, lightning struck the ground roughly a mile south of Nispelem, Washington, a small community inside the Colville Reservation in Okanogan County. There was no thunderstorm dumping rain to go with it, the kind of dry lightning that produces a spark with none of the moisture that would normally help suppress it. That spark caught in grass, brush, and timber on tribal trust land managed by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And for its first several days, the fire behaved the way thousands of lightning-caused fires do every summer across the American West, burning steadily but not yet dominating. Headlines. That changed fast. By July 26th, 10 days after ignition, the fire had already grown to more than 121,000 acres, and containment, instead of climbing as crews made progress, had actually dropped to just 9%. Officials explained plainly what was happening. Red flag conditions had generated strong, sustained winds that pushed the fire aggressively northward. In Level 3, Go Now evacuation orders went out along the Highway 21 corridor from South Empire Creek northward as the fire threatened to outrun the crews trying to contain it. The single most dramatic period of growth came just after that. Fire officials reported that the Kaiser Canyon fire more than doubled in size in a single day, driven by hot, dry, and windy conditions that pushed the fire aggressively north and northwest of Nispelem, deeper into the surrounding landscape. By August 1st, the fire had reached 134,167 acres, with containment climbing back up to 38%, as a Rocky Mountain Complex incident management team took over command of the incident that same weekend, bringing in a more specialized structure built specifically to handle fires of this scale and complexity. That transition matters more than it might sound like on paper. Wildfires of a certain size stop being manageable by a single local fire department or even a single regional agency, and instead get handed off to specialized rotating incident management teams, essentially traveling command structures made up of experienced fire managers, logistics coordinators, safety officers, and public information staff who specialize in running exactly this kind of large, extended operation. These teams typically deploy for a set stretch of 2 weeks or so before handing command off to a fresh team, since running an incident of this scale around the clock for weeks on end is its own kind of exhausting, high-stakes work that benefits from periodic rotation. Kaiser Canyon has already been managed by both a Rocky Mountain Complex incident management team and, more recently, the Northern Rockies National Incident Management Team, a sign of just how long this particular fire has now stretched on, well past the length of time most wildfires require before they are fully contained. The fire pushed past an area called Ojai Flats and crossed into neighboring Ferry County, then continued spreading northeast of Nispelem toward Omak Lake, threatening an increasingly wide stretch of Okanogan County as it went. Since that peak growth period, the story of the Kaiser Canyon fire has become less about explosive daily expansion and more about a grinding, sustained fight to hold the line. By August 3rd, the fire sat at roughly 136,500 acres. By August 5th, the most recent confirmed update as this video is being made, the fire had grown only modestly further to 136,713 acres, with containment climbing to 48%, nearly half the fire's perimeter now secured. Over its full run so far, the fire has grown at an average pace of roughly 6,800 acres per day, though almost all of that growth happened in the first 2 explosive weeks, rather than spread evenly across the full 3+ weeks it has now been burning. Kaiser Canyon is not burning in isolation, though, which is the last major factor on officials' minds right now. It is one of at least 12 major fires that were burning simultaneously across Washington state, when Governor Bob Ferguson declared a statewide emergency at the start of August, a list that includes the Maud Wright fire in Ferry County, The Little Giant and Sinlahaken fires in Chelan and Okanogan counties, and of course the Spokane complex itself. Every additional engine, aircraft, and incident management team assigned to Kaiser Canyon is a resource that cannot simultaneously be deployed somewhere else in a state where a dozen other significant fires are competing for exactly the same limited pool of personnel and equipment, a genuine strategic tension that shapes decisions on every one of these incidents. If you live anywhere near a large, active wildfire like this one, here is what is actually worth doing with this information. Understand your local evacuation level system before a level 3 order ever reaches you, since level 2 means be ready to leave at any moment, and level 1 means simply stay alert, but only level 3 means leave immediately, and knowing the difference in advance saves precious minutes when it counts. Keep a go bag packed with medications, important documents, and basic supplies year-round if you live in a fire-prone area, since fires like this one can escalate from routine to explosive in the span of a single hot, windy afternoon, exactly as Kaiser Canyon did in late July. Sign up for official county-level emergency alerts directly, rather than relying on secondhand social media posts, since containment percentages and evacuation zones can shift within hours during active suppression operations. And if you are near this specific fire, continue checking official channels like INCIWeb and your county emergency management office rather than any single video, including this one, since acreage and containment figures here reflect the most recent confirmed reporting, but can change quickly. If you live in a rural or reservation community near a large grass or rangeland fire specifically, a few additional precautions matter beyond the general evacuation basics. Move livestock and vehicles to open, cleared areas well before any evacuation order arrives if you have the ability to do so safely, since grass fires can move faster than trucks and trailers can be loaded once flames are already visible on the horizon. Clear dry vegetation away from structures and propane tanks well before fire season peaks, since even a fast-moving grass fire that never fully engulfs a building can still ignite it through radiant heat and flying embers alone. And if you rely on well water, understand that extended firefighting operations nearby can strain local water systems, so keeping a backup supply on hand is worth the minor inconvenience during an active fire season like this one. The Kaiser Canyon fire is a reminder that the biggest wildfire in the news is not always the one burning the most acreage, and the largest fire by acreage is not always the one causing the most damage. Spokane's fire tore through a city and became a national story specifically because of where it burned, not simply because of its size. Kaiser Canyon has burned an area more than 17 times larger with far less structural devastation, and it is still, as of this recording, only just short of half contained, still drawing over 1,000 personnel and tens of millions of dollars in suppression costs, and still sitting directly in the path of exactly the kind of hot, dry, windy weather that drove its most explosive growth in the first place. We will keep tracking this fire as new containment numbers and evacuation updates come in, and we will keep tracking the rest of Washington's active fire list right alongside it, since none of these incidents are really separate stories once you understand how much they are all drawing from the same stretched pool of crews, aircraft, and funding. If you want those updates the moment they land, subscribing is the way to make sure you do not miss them. And if you live in Okanogan or Ferry County, or anywhere else currently under an active fire watch, tell us in the comments what conditions look like where you are right now, because these numbers change fastest when the people living through them are the ones reporting in. Stay safe, and we will see you in the next one. And to everyone still fighting this fire, from the hand crews on the line to the families still watching evacuation maps, from a shelter cot, this video is really for you as much as anyone else watching it. As of the most recent reporting, a complex incident management team of 1,014 personnel remains assigned to the Kaiser Canyon fire. A combination of hand crews, engine crews, dozer operators, aviation resources, and the logistics and command staff required to keep an operation of that scale functioning day after day. Suppression costs have reached an estimated $31.5 million as of the most recent NIFC reporting, a figure that continues climbing every additional day the fire remains active, covering everything from aircraft fuel and equipment rental to the wages of well over 1,000 people working the incident around the clock. Now let's put this fire's true scale in context, because the comparison in this video's title is not just a dramatic hook. It is a genuinely useful way to understand what 136,000 acres actually means to someone who has never stood at the edge of a fire line. The wildfire that devastated parts of Spokane earlier this month, now formally tracked as the Spokane Complex Fire, combining the old Trails, Fairview, and Autumn Lane fires, burned roughly 8,000 acres before crews got a handle on it, an area that still managed to force 65,000 evacuations and destroy more than 600 structures because it tore directly through dense city neighborhoods. The Kaiser Canyon fire has burned more than 17 times that acreage, and depending on which specific snapshot of the Spokane complex's growth you compare it against, some measurements put that ratio closer to 20 times over. Yet, because Kaiser Canyon is burning through comparatively sparse rural reservation and rangeland rather than a dense urban neighborhood, it has not produced anywhere near the same structural destruction or displacement numbers. A stark illustration of a pattern fire, officials repeat constantly. Raw acreage and actual human impact are two entirely different measurements, and neither one alone tells the full story of how dangerous a given fire actually is. So what are fire officials actually watching right now, with containment sitting just under half and roughly half the fire's perimeter, still an open active edge? The first and most immediate factor is weather, specifically a fire weather watch that has remained in effect across the region due to low humidity and strong, gusty winds. Forecasters have repeatedly warned that these conditions could increase fire activity and complicate containment efforts in the coming days. Exactly the combination of hot temperatures, sometimes reaching 90 degrees, humidity, dropping as low as 12%, and strong wind gusts that drove the fire's explosive growth phase back in late July. Every additional day of that weather pattern is a day incident commanders have to treat as a potential repeat of the fire's worst growth spurts, rather than simply mopping up a fire in decline. Second, officials are watching containment line integrity specifically along the fire's northern and eastern edges, the directions the fire has already shown a clear tendency to run under wind pressure, pushing past Ojai Flats into Ferry County and northeast toward Omak Lake, an area of open, rolling terrain that offers few natural barriers to slow a wind-driven run. Holding those specific stretches of line matters more than the percentage number alone, because a fire can sit at 48% contained and still pose serious risk if the uncontained 52% happens to be exactly the stretch most exposed to incoming wind. Third, structure protection remains an ongoing priority in the communities closest to the fire's active edges, even without the kind of dense urban exposure Spokane faced, because rural homes, ranch outbuildings, and tribal community infrastructure scattered across the fire's footprint still require the same defensive work, clearing brush, wetting down structures, and staging engines that any threatened structure needs, regardless of how many neighbors surround it. There's also a specific aviation dimension to what officials are tracking day to day, since aircraft have played a major role in slowing the fire's spread across open, difficult to access terrain. Air tankers and helicopters have been used extensively to drop retardant and water along the fire's most active edges, particularly during the explosive growth phase in late July. But aircraft effectiveness depends heavily on the exact wind conditions officials are already watching, for other reasons entirely. Strong, gusty winds that make ground crews' jobs harder also frequently ground aircraft entirely or force pilots to fly more conservative, less effective drop patterns, meaning the same fire weather watch conditions that threaten to reignite explosive fire growth can simultaneously strip away one of the most effective tools crews have for slowing it down. That double bind, worse fire weather arriving at exactly the moment aerial support becomes least reliable, is one of the more frustrating realities incident commanders have had to manage throughout this fire's 3-week run. And it is a big part of why. Containment progress on a fire like this rarely moves in a smooth, predictable line, instead advancing in bursts whenever a calm weather window finally opens up. To understand why a fire like this can grow so explosively and then slow down so dramatically, it helps to understand what it is actually burning through. Unlike a forest fire working through heavy timber, the Kaiser Canyon fire has been feeding primarily on tall grass, averaging around 2.5 feet in height, along with brush and lighter timber. Grass fuels like this are sometimes called flashy fuels because they can ignite and spread extremely fast, racing across open terrain far quicker than a fire crawling through dense forest ever could, especially when pushed by strong wind. But that same quality cuts the other way once conditions calm. Down. Grass burns fast and completely, leaving behind far less fuel to continue smoldering compared to a timber fire, which means containment lines built around a grass fire, once wind and humidity cooperate, can hold far more reliably than lines built around a slower-burning forest fire, still working through logs and heavy brush. Think of the difference like the gap between a piece of newspaper catching fire and a log catching fire. Crumpled newspaper flares up almost instantly, throwing flame and heat everywhere at once, but it also burns itself out completely within seconds, leaving nothing left to reignite. A log takes far longer to catch, but once it does, it can smolder for hours, sometimes flaring back up long after it. Looked finished. Grass and light brush behave like that newspaper. Explosive, fast-moving, terrifying to watch race across open ground, but also quick to exhaust its own fuel once the front passes through, often within minutes rather than hours. Heavy timber behaves more like the log, slower to ignite but far more persistent, holding heat deep inside downed logs and thick duff layers that can smolder for days or weeks, occasionally flaring back to life along a containment line crews thought was secure. That is a large part of why Kaiser Canyon's containment percentage has been able to climb steadily once the wind calmed down in early August, even after such an explosive opening 2 weeks, while forest-dominated fires. Elsewhere in Washington and Oregon, this same season have continued fighting stubborn holdout pockets for far longer relative to their size. The human toll of managing a fire this size has been enormous, even without the kind of mass urban evacuation that made Spokane a national story. A Level 3 GO evacuation order has remained in effect for the Columbia River campground and surrounding areas closest to the fire's most active edges, while a Level 2 SET evacuation warning has covered a much broader ring of surrounding communities, telling residents to be ready to leave at a moment's notice without requiring them to go immediately. Displaced residents have had shelter available at the lake, Roosevelt High School Gymnasium and Cooley Dam, the Omak Community Center, and the Omak Longhouse, spreading emergency housing capacity across several communities rather than concentrating it in one place. Multiple road closures have remained in effect for extended stretches of the fire's run, including portions of Highway 155, Cache Creek Road, Columbia River Road, and Buffalo Lake Road, disrupting travel and commerce across a wide stretch of Okanogan and Ferry counties well beyond the immediate fire perimeter itself. None of this happened in a vacuum. Kaiser Canyon ignited during Washington's 4th consecutive year of statewide drought. Emergency, a stretch of dry years that has left vegetation across the eastern half of the state primed to burn well before peak fire season even arrives. The winter leading into this fire season actually delivered close to normal precipitation totals, but warmer temperatures meant more of that precipitation fell as rain rather than mountain snow, denying the region the slow-release water reservoir that snowpack normally provides through spring and summer. By the time lightning struck near Nespelem in mid-July, the tall grass and brush across that stretch of Okanogan County was already exactly the kind of tinder dry fuel that turns a single strike into a fire covering more than 200 square miles within weeks. Because the fire is burning on the Colville Reservation, its management has involved a level of coordination that goes beyond a typical state wildfire response. The incident has been jointly managed by the Colville Agency, the Rocky Mountain Complex Incident Management Team, and the Northern Rockies National Incident Management Team, working directly alongside the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation, as well as state and federal fire agencies. That tribal partnership matters enormously here, since the land burning is not simply forest or rangeland in the abstract. It is tribal trust land, home to communities with deep, specific relationships to that landscape, and it is part of why the Confederated Tribes of the Colville Reservation were named directly, alongside Spokane, Chelan, Ferry, Okanogan, Stevens, and Yakima counties and 2 other tribal nations, in the federal emergency declaration that unlocked FEMA coordination and funding for Washington's broader 2026 wildfire crisis. The economic and environmental toll extends well beyond the fire's own footprint as well. The Colville Reservation's economy depends heavily on grazing land, timber resources, and hunting grounds, all of which fall inside or immediately adjacent to a fire perimeter now covering more than 200 square miles. Ranchers with grazing leases on affected land have had to relocate cattle with little notice, and the loss of grass and rangeland this late in the season means recovery for affected grazing allotments could take years rather than months, since native grasses in this part of Washington do not simply grow back the following spring the way a suburban lawn might. Smoke from a fire this size has also settled repeatedly over surrounding communities in Okanogan and Ferry counties, at times reaching neighboring towns along the Columbia River corridor and prompting air quality advisories even in areas well outside any evacuation zone, a reminder that a fire's health impact reaches far beyond whoever happens to be standing directly in its path.